brand new video on the channel. Inside of today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the best build for all 77 brawlers in the game right now. So I do this every single update cycle, so every 2 months, just to give you guys a refresher, as you guys constantly ask for this every time an update comes around. So this time around, we'll be doing it in alphabetical order. Also, I did a tier list yesterday, so make sure to check that out as well. We'll be running through this in alphabetical order, a little bit easier to run through. So we're going to be starting off with 8-bit. So with 8-bit, it just depends on the game mode and the map and the situation. So if you're playing gem grab or maybe up against bad matchups, you want to go cheat cartridge and plugged in. But every other mode and situation, I really love boosted booster, especially when you combine it with any high damage brawler. And of course, you only want to use extra credits in heist. In terms of the gears then, so I've been starting to use health gear a lot more than damage gear, just because again, in the tougher matchups, health gear really helps out. But reload, you can never go wrong with that, and you always get some value with it. So next up, we have Amber. So with Amber, I feel like both her gadgets are really good. If you're playing a map and a scenario where you're up against tanks, then of course Dancing Flames is still a really good gadget. But in a more open scenario for fire starters, it's going to be really strong and also really good into those sharpshooters. And then in terms of star powers, always Wild Flames. And then in terms of gears, I pretty much go this all of the time. If I'm playing a grassy map, then I go with Vision gear. If I'm playing a mode like Hot Zone, then Mythic gear can be okay. Next up, we have Angelo. So Angelo's the new brawler in town, and in terms of his kit overall, I won't really say it's too exciting, but at the same time, I think definitely his jump gadget is way better. So I had a lot of fun with this, especially in certain maps. It can be fun, but the distance you get on a jump is insane. It's really good to get away or even close down the gap onto opponents. In terms of star powers, of course, it just matters on the situation. Empower, you're going to get value out of it all of the time. So if you're going to buy one, just buy this one. But this one can, of course, be good on maps like Bridge to Far. In terms of gears, I just go with this setup pretty much all the time. He's pretty squishy. And of course, the damage gear on top of the poison and just his insane damage, you're just going to one-shot people for fun. Next, we have Ash. So all of the time, you're going to be using Chill Pill to heal you back up. All of the time, you're going to be using First Bash. It allows you to get to maximum rage as quickly as possible. And then all of the time, I use speed and the damage. I don't switch from anything else. Neither do the pros. It's just the best build 100%. In terms of Barley overall then, so in this meta, I feel like Sticky Syrup's probably a lot more safer, but I don't know. It really just depends on a matchup. If you're just going into Barley and random queue, then Sticky Syrup's going to be better most of the time. And in terms of star powers then, so thrower versus thrower, you'll be using medical use. But again, if you're just going in with randoms, then extra nauseous is going to be better most of the time. And then I pretty much just switch between these 3 gears, just depending on how I feel. If I'm facing so many assassins, then I'll just switch over to the gadget charge. Next up, we have B. So B is an interesting one. Rattle Hive is a better gadget for the most part, but if you're facing off against fellow snipers, especially when you're playing ranked, Honey Molasses is better just because it allows you to tank an extra shot. Or if you're playing on a map with a lot of walls, then this can be a pretty useful gadget still. In terms of the star powers, then Honeycomb is better 90% of the time. But if you just want to put out consistent damage, Insta-B load is still a good star power. Both of them are good, and it can just depend on what you just feel like playing for the most part. And in terms of gears then, it depends. If I'm using Rattled Hive, then I like to just use this gear because it's annoying, but I'll probably say that this is a more safer option. Damage and shield, you can never go wrong because, of course, B deals a lot of damage with the big sting, and not only that, she's really squishy, so she needs that extra shield. Next up, we have Belle. So with Belle, she's got 2 good gadgets. You want to go Nest Egg on game modes like Bounty and also Hot Zone, just because it confirms kills a lot easier. And then Reverse Polarity can be really good and surprising, but I think Nest Egg probably is the safer option for the most part. In terms of star powers, positive feedback all of the time, even into tanks. I don't really like grounded. Doesn't feel like you get any value out of it. But in terms of the gears then, so I go reload speed gear all of the time, literally every single time, but it just depends again on the matchup and the scenario. Most of the time I'll probably opt for this, but again, if I'm facing snipers, you definitely need that shield gear. And as for the hypercharge, I'd say it's not really worth the investment of 5,000 coins, but because with the hypercharge, Belle turns into an S tier brawler just because of the speed and damage buff, I probably would buy it with gems if it pops up as an offer. And then next up we have Bibi. So with Bibi, I think, of course, the only good gadget is Vitamin Booster. And then in terms of star powers, again, it could just depend on what Bibi player you are. I think Home Run's probably the better star power at the moment. But if you're playing on a super grassy map, you may as well use the star power and then switch over to something like this because you get a shield and you get the extra movement with the speed already. It's pretty good. In terms of the hypercharge then, you definitely want to buy this one. It makes Bibi such a good brawler because there's a speed boost, the shield boost, and just the super itself. You're able to get a lot of team wipes with it. So hypercharge is definitely worth worth it. And then lastly, we have Bo. So with Bo, I think his totem is actually a little bit glitched right now. It doesn't really work properly, but tripwire isn't even that strong anyways, so I wouldn't even recommend buying any of these, to be honest. The only good reason you'd use tripwire is in Brubble to open up the goal and then shoot at the same time. You can make some good plays like that. In terms of his star power, snare or bear pretty much all of the time. There are some use cases for circle and eagle. If you play showdown, it can be pretty good, but I'll just opt for this all of the time. And then again, just depends on what map you're playing with Bo. You want to use reload all of the time, and then if it's a grassy map, switch over to vision gear. If it's a non-grassy map, just keep this gear. Next up, we have Bonnie. So in terms of gadgets, easy sugar rush 100% of the time. In terms of star power, black powder all of the time. Then in terms of gears, pretty much I use this every single time because of the projectile speed nerf. I think the gadget charge gear is literally essential. Then it's kind of up to you what play style you want to play with Bonnie, whether you play a passive Bonnie or really aggressive Bonnie. You can switch between the damage and the health gear. Next up, we have Brock then. So Brock, pretty simple. Rocket fuel on the map. You want to open up walls, especially on maps like out in the open. But maybe if you're playing with randoms a lot of the time, you don't know what you're facing off against, rocket laces is probably better, just so you can escape assassins. In terms of star powers, more rockets literally all of the time, unless you're playing like knockout or bounty. But still in knockout and bounty, I prefer more rockets just because you can confirm kills with your super so much easier. In terms of gears, I'll be going reload speed gear all of the time, and then in heist damage, and probably maybe in a tougher matchup I'll switch the damage to the shield gear because it's pretty squishy if you're facing off against other snipers. Next up, we have Bull. So on heist, you want to be going T-bone injector unless it's a really tough matchup against Stomper, but Stomper's just safer pretty much all the time. The far better gadget in my opinion. Next, in terms of star powers, I mean, it depends on whether you're a really good Bull player. I think for the average Bull player, tough guy is going to be better most of the time, but you can get some insane value with Berserker if you play it right. I still think tough guy is the better one overall. Then in terms of gears, then I think for the advanced Bull players, you should probably go something like this. But again, if you're in a tough matchup, you probably want to switch to supercharged gear to like the health gear because it will help you gain your super automatically from taking damage. And in terms of the hyper charge, I don't think it's worth buying with coins, but it's still a good hyper charge. So if you like playing Bull, then it's worthwhile investing in. Next up, we have Buster. So this gadget, 100% of the time, is pretty much a free kill when you grab someone in. And then same with Kevlar Vest, 100% of the time, the other star power. I don't even know what it really does. In terms of gears then, I pretty much go this one every single time as well because getting 4 pulls is just so good at confirming kills. And then in terms of the next gear, again, it just depends on whether it's a grassy maps, of course, speed, and then damage for all of the other maps. Next, we have Buzz then. So Buzz, you want to be using this gadget pretty much all of the time, but on grassy maps, this gadget is so underrated and can be pretty threatening. But for the most part, for star powers, Ice Shop is going to be the better star power overall. I feel like people are sleeping on Tougher Torpedo though, especially with his hypercharge. It combines with Tougher Torpedo. You can get some kills so easily with this. So, you know, test things out. Ice Shop's a more competitive option for sure. And in terms of gears then, you pretty much want to use this setup every single time. But again, if it's super bushy, you may as well use the speed gear for sure. Next up, we have Byron. So I use booster shots literally all of the time. It's so good for cycling through supers. But maybe if you're in a more passive matchup, then this is a good gadget as well. Both of them are good. I just prefer this one most of the time. In terms of star powers, I use melees literally all of the time, unless your sole purpose is to literally stand behind someone like Colette, 8-bit, and spam a bunch of heals in like hot zone, then of course injection is going to be good. But I just like melees. It's really annoying, especially against those big tanky brawlers. In terms of gears then, because Byron's so squishy, I pretty much use shield all the time, and I'll probably just use damage all the time because you get extra value out of your healing as well. But if I want to be annoying, I'll just switch to this and just spam out those 3 gadgets because of course Byron isn't the best right now. Next up, we have Carl. So of course Carl is just trash, so it probably doesn't matter what build you use with him, but Flying Hook 100% of the time, Protective Barrette 100% of the time. Maybe because you can't even use your super too much. I've been experimenting with Power Throw, but I just don't feel like it makes that much of a difference. So you may as well use Protective in case you do get a good matchup eventually. You want to be using this gear 100% of the time, and then damage or the shield or even health. Honestly, you can get value out of all of these gears, but I think damage is just a safe one overall. And then next up, we've got Charlie. In terms of the gadgets then, so this gadget is actually really underrated. There's actually a lot of counter picks to Charlie in high competitive play, so a lot of pros use personal space. Again, it's highly underrated. You can waste a lot of opponents' ammo. Spiders is a better gadget overall though, especially if you're facing off against sharpshooters. And if you have the gadget charge gear, you can just spam out 4 sets of spiders. It's insane. In terms of star power, digestive all of the time. I mean, Slimy, I feel like could be underrated, but it's just a little bit weird. I just like Digestive a lot more. And in terms of star powers, I pretty much use damage all of the time. Unless it's a super grassy map, then you might get some value out of the vision gear. And then lastly, we have Chester. So with Chester, I actually like using Candy Beans just because I don't feel like it's the strongest in 1v1s at all. At least Candy Beans, I know it's a random kind of stat boost, but yeah, hopefully I get like a damage boost or a reload speed boost, and that's really going to help you in a 1v1. Whereas this one, I don't know, I don't feel like most of the supers are that powerful, so that's why I prefer Candy Beans, but most people like Spicy Dice. In terms of star powers, Bella Mania 100% of the time, and in terms of gears, I use this setup all of the time. But if it's a grassy map, I think Vision Gear is underrated, but I still feel like you need the damage with Chest. So next up we have Chuck. So it's a pretty simple one. In terms of most of the time, I'll be using Ghost Train because you can go through walls, but rerouting is actually underrated, especially in competitive play. It can be pretty hard to actually get your post onto the safe. So what you can normally do with this gadget is that you throw one mid-map and then get to that, pop your gadget again, and then throw it onto the safe. So rerouting is a good competitive option. In terms of star powers, and both of them are pretty decent. Pit stops are really good in heist. In other game modes, tickets please can be good as well, but I don't know, I see a lot of people kind of switch between both star powers are decent. In terms of gears then for most part, I'll just literally just go this. In terms of if it's a map with a lot of walls, then you might want to go with the gadget charge gear, but you can never go wrong going damage and shield, of course, being a brawler that is just literally primarily supposed to get damage onto the safe. Next up we have Colette. So you got your gadget 100% of the time. Mass attacks I use like 90% of the time. You might want to use push it on like gem grab or brawl ball, but I still feel like push it, I don't know what it is with it. I just feel like I'm too squishy with this star power. Sometimes it can be good. Sometimes you're getting killed whilst you're pushing people. So I just prefer mass attacks. It's just so good when you combine it with gotcha. And then I use this build every single time. Having 4 heal gadgets and the damage gear, it's the reason you play Colette. So it's absolutely insane. And the Teen Spirit, it's worthwhile even investing your coins in. It's such a good hypercharge to have, and especially in heist, you literally delete the heist safe. Next up we have Colt. So I use speed loader most of the time, but if you're looking to open up a map and has some key walls to destroy, maybe in brawl ball as well, silver bullet is going to be better. But yeah, speed loader of course in heist. In terms of star powers, it's literally your personal preference. It's a 50-50 choice. I use Magnum Special most of the time because it just increases your bullet speed and increases your range, but this can be pretty good as well. Again, just depends on you, and I use this setup pretty much every single time. In terms of the hypercharge itself isn't the greatest, but you get a speed and damage boost. So if you just play a lot of Colt, then it's worthwhile getting. I don't think it's worthwhile probably investing 5,000 coins in because it's not really that interesting, but at the same time it's really up to you. Next up we have Cordelius. So I still use replanting pretty much all of the time just because it can catch people off guard. You can use it defensively, you can use it aggressively. Whilst this only lasts for a second, it's still good on grassy maps, but I'd still prefer replanting myself. That's just personal preference, but I'd probably say it's a 50-50 anyways. In terms of star powers then, so most people use Mushroom Kingdom, even though Combo Shrooms is decent, especially when you combine it with the hypercharge and extra damage buff. Combo Shrooms can be pretty good, especially in heist, but I just prefer Mushroom Kingdom in case, I don't know, if you're low HP, you can just throw someone into the Shadow Realm, heal up with the mushrooms, and get yourself into a better position. In terms of gears then, I use the gadget charge gear all of the time and the damage gear. Of course, if it's a grassy map, I probably will just switch to this instead. And then in terms of the hypercharge, I would buy this one 100% even with coins. It's such a good hypercharge to have, especially considering Cordelius is S tier because of it. Definitely. So in terms of Crow then, I think both gadgets are just pretty meh at the moment. I wouldn't really invest coins into any of them. I'd say Slow and Toxin is still the better one overall, but this one can have some good play, especially if you pop this gadget with the hypercharge combined as well. Now that the shield boost has got removed, I think that combo can be pretty underrated, but most of the time you just want to use Slow and Toxin. You just got to make sure that there's a teammate next to you to try and take down that brawler pretty quickly. In terms of star powers then, I think both of them again are just pretty meh. They don't really help out Crow too much. I think Extra Toxic still is the better one but Carrying Crow's so underrated, especially if you're facing a bunch of tanks and especially in heist as well. In terms of the gears then, I pretty much use the shield gear on Crow all of the time, and then again just depends on what map you're really playing on, but I think it's just safe to go probably damage or speed. I don't think mythic gear helps too much. I don't know, Crow's a weird one. And in terms of the hypercharge as well, at least you're getting your hypercharge more frequently, but I think it's an incredibly overrated hypercharge in my opinion. Don't really help him out as much as you think, because you've probably watched too many TikToks or YouTube shorts of it deleting the boss. You're not going to do that in a real game. Let's just put it straight. Anyways, next we have Darryl. So in terms of the gadgets, and both of them are just okay. Tar Barrel is going to be better for the advanced Darryl players because you can slow people and deal more damage to them. But Recall and Rotate is going to be better in Heist on the high safe, and just better, say, if you're really struggling to get your super with Darryl, then it can be a little bit of a better option. In terms of star power, Steel Hoops 100% of the time. Unless you're playing Pit Stop or a base race heist map, then Rolling Riddle is going to be a little bit better. I still just prefer Steel Hoops. And then in terms of the gears, again, just depending on the map, but it's always, I would say, beneficial to probably run this build on Darryl. Next up, we have Doug then. So with Doug, I think the extra mustard is going to be the better gadget overall. Of course, if you're literally only healing, double sausage is going to be better. But I think 80% of the time, you're probably playing more aggressive with Doug since the rework. Next, in terms of the star power, then I think that self-service is still the better one. Even though it doesn't give you that much healing, I think it's just still better because it can help you in some situations. I think fast food might be a little bit underrated though. I'll have to test that out a bit more. In terms of the gears, I pretty much never switch away from this because you don't play Doug on an open map ever. You're only playing on grassy maps, so you're always using speed and you're always using damage because you get the additional healing and damage, of course, with that damage gear. Next up, we have Dynamite. So satchel charge 100% of the time, demolition 100% of the time, and then in terms of gears, you want to be running damage and the gadget charge gear because having 4 stuns is just so essential. And then, of course, having a damage charge gear, pop that with your hypercharge and demolition, you're just dealing insane damage. You're literally dropping a nuke onto people. Also, in terms of the hypercharge, is definitely worthwhile buying this one with coins as well because you can just get so many team wipes. Although it takes a little bit of a while to get it, once you get it, you can just get 1, 2, 3 kills with ease. Lastly, we have Edgar. So still, Let's Fly is a better gadget for sure because if you're using hardcore, you're literally removing yourself from the game for like 30 seconds. Good players, or 20, 30 seconds, however long it is, good players won't let you get within distance to charge up your super. So hardcore is just useless for that reason. Let's Fly is just still way better. And in terms of gears then, so I'm starting to switch back to the old kind of build with him with the damage and the shield gear because he needs that. But at the same time, you could probably opt for something like this, just switch between, see what feels right for you. I think you literally can't go wrong with all 4 of his gears. I know you want me to tell you what ones to go for sure, but it's a hard one to tell. I've been testing it a lot. I mean, this is the old build, that's still pretty good. In terms of the best star powers then, it depends on what matchup you have. I think Fisticuffs is still the better one overall, just because it allows you to build up your super more and then build up your hypercharge more. But hard landing is going to be better against those squishy brawlers. So both star powers are good. Probably recommend getting Fisticuffs. And of course, with this hypercharge, you want to be buying that with coins 100%. It's one of the best hypercharges for sure, and it makes Edgar an actual viable brawler. So next up, we have El Primo. In terms of the gadgets, Suplex Supplement is going to be the better one overall. But if you want to destroy some walls or just for some pressure in Brawl Ball, then this is going to be pretty good. Or on maps like Split where you need to open up the walls. In terms of star powers then, it can just depend on what kind of El Primo player you are. Because I'm trash at El Primo, I like running the speed star power just because if you miss it, or even if you just want to follow up on your super, it's just better and easier. El Fuego can be good on the, I would say, the weaker HP brawlers. Even though it got buffed, I still prefer Meteor Rush. In terms of the gears then, overall, I typically run this sort of build because even though it's only 10% faster, just because you're able to cycle through your supers a little bit easier, and of course that's just El Primo. You want to abuse his super as much as possible. That's what I use. But again, tough matchup, switch over to the health gear. Grassy map, go with this. But I pretty much use damage in every single one, never go wrong with that. And in terms of the hypercharge then, again, I wouldn't really suggest buying this for 5,000 coins. But if you like tanky options, El Primo does get a good speed boost and shield boost from this. So I still recommend maybe getting it with your free gems. Next up, we have M. So in terms of her gadget, Friend Zoner 100% of the time. I still use Hype as well, just because that's the type of M's player I am. I feel like you get a lot of value when you group up multiple people within that super. And Bad Karma, that's going to be better in Heist, but you know, typically you probably don't use M's too much in Heist outside of Pit Stop. And in terms of gears, I use this setup every single time. But you might want to opt for, instead of damage, probably the gadget charge gear, because then you get an extra pushback. So I kind of flick between these two. Most of the time I run damage though. Next up, we have Eve. So gotta go 100% of the time. Unnatural Order, I use 95% of the time. Maybe the only time I switch to this is if I'm facing off against multiple sharpshooters, but still, I don't really like the star power. I go with Unnatural Order, and then I use this build every single time because you get just value out of it infinitely with Eve. Next up, we have Fang. So I actually switch a lot in between these gadgets, because Corn Fu got buffed a couple of updates ago, and although it doesn't do insane amounts of damage, it can be annoying for the opponents to deal with, especially resetting their health regen. So I think that can be pretty underrated. But roundhouse kick, you do get a stun, and you can interrupt a lot of different brawlers' attacks. So both are pretty good and useful. In terms of star powers, then fresh kicks is going to be the better one for sure, unless, I don't know, you're getting close to masters kind of level of gameplay. Then divine souls is good, especially if you just want to get solo kills. You know, I'm talking like knockout, bounty. That's probably going to be more reliable. In terms of gears, then I'd say I'd use this pretty much all the time, but I don't know, sometimes I might go for the shield, but I just like having that extra gadget, especially if I use Corn Fu. And Dragon Kick is definitely worthwhile purchasing with coins, gems, whatever. It's one of the best hypercharges in the game. Next up, we have Frank. So I don't really care about his build. I use the second gadget all of the time, but you might want to use this because his super gets cancelled out a lot. But I just feel like you need that extra damage just to give him a little bit extra threat on the field. In terms of star powers then, so I've actually just started using Power Grab because, again, like Sponge, probably it's the better star power, but because he's so trash, I feel like at least if I manage to get a kill somehow with Frank, at least I'm a little bit more threatening for a while. I don't know. He's just trash, so what's the point of even messing around with his build? And then in terms of gears, I just use this up all of the time. Next up, we have Gale. So Gale, I use Twister all of the time and Freezing Snow all of the time. Maybe on a map with a lot of walls, you might get some value out of Blustery Blow. But I still think Freezing Snow is one of the best star powers in the game. Spring Ejects you might want to use on a few certain maps, but I don't think there's too many maps where you get that a lot of value from it. Twister's just always getting good value, and I use this setup a lot, depending on whether it's a super grassy map where Gale actually thrives on a map like Center Stage. I use this setup, but maybe elsewhere you might want to swap to something like this. I think you always get value out of the damage gear for sure out of Gale. Next up, we have Gene. So his Vengeful Spirits gadget got buffed, and is actually really good where Gene is typically good on bounty, knockout. It's good at confirming kills, but not back if you're playing gem grab or a map that isn't open. Then of course lamp blowout's going to be much better. And then I typically never stay away from this build. Normally you play Gene on a grassy map, so vision's going to be really good. But I've been playing Gene a lot on more open maps recently, so the health gear is one that I opt for pretty well, because with Gene, normally you don't have much time to heal up, right? You're normally healing up your teammates, so if you get the chance to, health gear is going to allow you to get back up to full HP quickly. Next up, Gale, Walking Cane 100% of the time, and then depending on the game mode, new perspective on a more aggro game mode like Gem Grab Brawl Ball. I'm going to be using Fake Injury on Knockout and Bounty, because especially against the heavy hitters, it can pair really well with the shield gear. Again, it depends on the game mode. Use shield gear on the survival game modes like Knockout and Bounty. Everywhere else, I just typically use this build because, again, the extra Walking Cane is so good with Grey. And then lastly, we have Griff, so Piggy Bank 100% of the time. Unless you're playing the quickfire modifier, then Coin Shower can actually be useful on the high save. Other than that, Piggy Bank all of the time. In terms of the meta, I go Business Resilience all the time. It's really good, especially at survival, but Keep the Change on a quickfire modifier is really strong, so do bear that in mind. And then I never switch away from this. Sometimes if there's a map which I really need to open up, then I might opt for the gadget charge gear. Getting 4 wall breaks is really good, like a map like Split, but other than that, I never really switch away from this build. So next up, we have Grom. So in terms of gadgets, I use Radio Check pretty much 95% of the time. There might be a map like Center Stage where Watchtower is actually pretty strong, but I just think this is the best way to use Grom, especially if playing Heist, Bounty, Knockout. If you can surprise someone with his gadget, you're going to get a free kill every time. X Factor 100% of the time, and I pretty much use this setup all of the time. If I'm playing Heist, then I might want to opt for something like this, because you use Grom just to purely get damage, so an extra gadget is really strong, but most of the time you can't go wrong with this. Really safe overall. Next up, we have Gus, so Cookie Popper 100% of the time, Spirit Animal 100% of the time, and I just use this setup all of the time. Again, an extra Cookie Popper is good. Having a damage gear as well, you know, it doesn't have a lot of damage, so when he's low HP, you can at least up your damage a little bit. Next up, we have Hank. So Barricade 100% of the time, it's gonna blow 100% of the time. And then gears, I literally never swap from this. Maybe on a super grassy map, I do opt for this instead, just because you're able to suffocate people easier if you get the additional speed from the super rare gear. But other than that, I just use this up every time. Next up, we have Jacky. So again, first gadget all of the time. Cat Crusher 95% of the time. You might want to use Hardy Hard Hat. I don't know if you're playing a pretty open map which you don't really use Jacky in, when you're not going to get close to the opponents, then Hardy Hard Hat will help you, but you want to use Cat Crusher. You want that extra damage literally every time, because even if you die, then your opponents are going to die as well through your counter crusher. And then I like to swap between this setup right here, so it just depends on what type of Jacky player you're on, because if you get 4 gadgets with Jacky with this speed, it's really strong. Of course, you're not playing a grassy map, you can opt for this, but I think you definitely need a gadget charge gear, but it's just up to you whether you get the speed or the damage one. And in terms of the hyper charge, it's a decent one to get. I wouldn't waste your 5,000 coins on it though, that's a hefty price, but if you do get it, it is a pretty good one. It makes Jacky a lot better. Next we have Janet, so drop the base pretty much 95% of the time. I don't think it's worthwhile purchasing this one, but at least it's kind of underrated in some like knockout bounty maps and just to get away a little bit easier. But I still, the reason why I use Janet is to use this gadget to stop people from regenerating their health and actually scout bushes. That's why I use Janet. Vocal warm-up 100% of the time. And then again, it just depends on what map you play on, because Janet's really good on grassy maps. Even though there's more tanks, she's just really good with the vision gear and also this gadget. But of course, you're playing Janet in a more open map like Belle's Rock, for example, you want to use this setup all of the time. Jessie, so you want to be using Spark Plug on every game mode except for Heist, and then Heist Recall Spring, because getting that additional damage with the Hypercharge combined is insane. Energize 100% of the time. Please don't go Shocky, it is just terrible. And in terms of the gears, then again, it just depends on whether you play Jessie on a grassy map or an open map. Vision gear can be somewhat underrated, but I just opt for speed and damage most of the time. Getting that extra damage with Jessie is very good. And then Scrappy 2.0, I definitely recommend getting this with your coins as well. Even though it's 5,000, I recommend getting it. You're getting your Scrappy turret every 1.6 supers now. She's actually S tier just because of that change, so I'd recommend getting her. In terms of kit then, so again, it depends if you're a showdown main. So I think Cheeseburger's an underrated gadget for sure. You can get some really cheesy strategies going, but I think Cardboard Box, you're getting invisibility of 5 seconds. That's really strong. It allows you to get your first super much quicker, because you can pop invis, run to the opponent, especially one of the snipers, kill them, or at least get close to killing them, and you get your first super, so that's why it's good. In terms of star powers, both of them are just terrible. Like, yeah, showdown, that's going to be good in showdown. This one, it's okay, but it doesn't really improve kit that much, so I wouldn't really bother buying either of them, to be honest. And in terms of gears, I go for this setup because you want survivability with kit, and of course you want that extra invisibility. You're not really going to use the damage gear too much with kit. Next up we have Larry and Laurie, so order fullback 100% of the time, protect protocol probably 90% of the time. I think this one's actually a little bit underrated, but it's good in Heist as well. But I think most people use Protocol Protect. And in terms of gears then, so most of the time I use damage and the extra gadget charge gear, because the healing and just the way you can maneuver around the map with this gadget is so strong. So you need the extra gadget charge gear for sure. But you might want to opt for maybe this if you would just want more survivability with Larry and Laurie. And then lastly, we have Leon. So Lollipop Drop pretty much 95% of the time, unless, I don't know, you want to just be a little bit different and go Clone Projector maybe into some snipers. Could be underrated, but I'd just rather just go Lollipop Drop. It's just such a good gadget. And then most of the time you want to use Invisi-Heal. I use Invisi-Heal all of the time because you compare that with the Mythic gear and the Hypercharge, and it's just so hard to kill you. But I will say, on a more open map, I think Smoke Trails is underrated. It's harder to play, but if you pop this with Hypercharge as well, you go lightning fast. So it could be underrated. I need to test it out more. I think Invisi-Heal is just such a good star power. You can't go wrong with it. And I use this build all of the time on Leon. Again, if you're playing Bounty or into Snipers, you might want to switch to the Shield, but you can never go wrong with this setup. Next up, we have Lola. So in terms of gadgets, freeze frame every single time. And then depending on the game mode, I would say in Heist and maybe against tanky brawlers, you want to use Improvise most of the time, but especially in Quickfire Modifier and also maybe like Hot Zone survivability game mode, Sealed with a Kiss is a really underrated star power. And then I never really switch away from these two gears, but Vision gear is very good with Lola on grassy maps, so of course probably go for this one if it's of course a grassy map. Next up we have Lou, so we want to go with this gadget 100% of the time. We want to go with Hypothermia 100% of the time, literally by far the better star power. In terms of gears, I use the gadget charge all of the time as well, because this gadget is just so good for the way you play Lou. You throw a super onto someone, gadget them, and then it's so much easier to freeze them and cycle your next super. And of course, the supercharge gear allows you to get your super one shot quicker. That's the reason you use Lou, right? Is literally for his super alone. Next we have Maisie. So of course this gadget every time, this star power every single time as well. You get the combination with the gadget and the super and the slowdown from the star power. Really solid overall. Of course, you use a gadget charge gear every single time as well. And then I pretty much use damage all the time with Maisie because that's why I use her, right, to try and counter tanks. And in terms of the hypercharge, I think the hypercharge is a very good one with Maisie. It doesn't like feel like it does a ton, but I just think the cycling potential is really good. It allows Maisie to counter tank so well, so definitely worthwhile purchasing that one. Next up, we have Mandy. So again, depends up on the map. I really like Cookie Crumbs. You can catch opponents off guard and also cycle to super quicker, but this is really good. But a lot of times I end up missing this one, so I actually prefer this one because it's more surprising a lot of the time. And of course, this star power every single time, and then I never switch away from this build right here. Next, we have Max. So with Max, you want to go to Phase Shifter every single time. You want to go with, I don't know, it depends on what kind of Max player you are. I think most people use Run and Gun just because she really lacks damage at the moment. But if you're playing like Gem Grab, or if you're playing the role of support a lot, so you're kind of hanging back a lot of the time, and Supercharge is going to be a good one as well. Both star powers are just meh. In terms of gears, then you can literally run every single gear with Max. She's super versatile with her gears. I keep swapping it up. A lot of times I like to go with health, damage, extra gadget, because you get an extra phase shifter, which allows you to make more plays. I'm kind of sticking to this one right now, mainly because you don't have much damage with Max, and the gadget allows you to make more plays. Next, we have Meg. So again, it depends on the matchup really. On a knockout, I actually like to go toolbox because you can tank an extra shot from Piper, Nani, etc. All these heavy hitters. But most of the time, jolting bolts is obviously going to be the better one. It gives you a little bit of healing. It doesn't give you that much, but it just allows you to press up a lot easier. In terms of star powers, you're going to be using force field pretty much all of the time. But there are some cases, I don't know, if you're playing a map that you're going to be facing more aggro brawlers, heavy metal is good to push them back, especially if you're facing like a Buzz, Carl, Edgar, etc. In terms of the gears then, so kind of up to you. I like to use damage because she really does lack damage, and then health just to top you up a little bit more. But the shield gear is really good with Meg as well, because you get the shield gear on top of your mech form, but also your smaller form as well. Kind of up to you. I like to swap throughout it, but most of the time I run this one. It seems to be doing really well in knockout. Next up, we have Mico. So again, it depends what Mico player you are. I like Presto mainly because it doesn't actually show the gadget icon above his head when you pop this gadget. So you can just pop this off spawn, for example, and then surprise the opponents. This one is good for a little bit of extra damage and just to annoy opponents and confirm the jump a lot easier. So again, just depends upon you. Both of them are pretty decent. Depends on the game mode here. So you want to be using this one in Heist and in Showdown. And then, of course, Monkey Business everywhere else. Such a good star power. You definitely need it with Mico. So this is one of the only few star powers I recommend buying with your coins. 100%. You need this or else he's pretty trash brawler. And then in terms of the gears, I never swap away from this. And the Hypercharge, do not buy it. The worst Hypercharge probably in the game. Then we've got Mortis. So in terms of gadgets, you want to be using Survival Shovel 100% of the time. You're going to be using Cord Snake most of the time. Sometimes people might opt for Creepy Harvest, but I think it's just so hard to actually kill people with Mortis nowadays. So I'd rather go with Cord Snake, get some extra movement, you know, be more of a threat, get your long dash a lot quicker. And then in terms of gears, I pretty much never swap away from these two right here. I might sometimes go with the extra gadget charge. I might go the Mythic gear in 5v5. But for the most part, I think this is just the safest option on Mortis. And then lastly, we have Mr.p. So in terms of Mr.p, I pretty much always use Service Bell if I'm facing off against an enemy thrower like Tick, Sprout, you know, on Shooting Star. Then I might opt for Portal Reinforcements, but again, I just don't think it's even that great. You may as well just go for Service Bell. And then I use Revolving Door all of the time because you use Mr.p right to annoy the opponents with your porters. So you want to give them more HP more than anything, so that's going to help out. And then the gears, I never really swap with this. I think the Vision Gear is underrated on grassy maps with Mr.p. I don't know, I always use it on like double swoosh, for example, so that's just one thing to bear in mind. Now moving on to Nani, starting off with the gadget sense. So if you're playing Heist, even on Gem Grab, most of the time I like using the teleport gadget. You can catch people from surprise, and also if you're pretty weak, you can just teleport back into spawn, especially with Tempered Steel. Trust me, the pros use this in Gem Grab, but most of the time you're going to be using Nani because you want to be countering snipers like Piper, Belle, Angelo. So return to sender is going to be insane against those snipers. I use return to sender on bounty, knockout, etc. Also in terms of star powers then, so like I said, you want to be using this star power on bounty and knockout, because most of the time you're going to be in a safe spot at the beginning of like a knockout round. You can use this and you don't really get kills with Nani people, you get them pretty weak, and then tempered steel everywhere else. But in terms of gears, I like to use this setup every single time with Nani, but I will actually, if I'm playing heist, I will swap to like this build right here and go the extra gadget, because getting 4 TPs allows you just to create more pressure and always be a threat to the opponents. Next up we have Nita. So in terms of gadgets, I like to swap a lot of the times. This gadget is just good for wasting opponents' ammo, but if you're a skilled Nita and you know how to time this gadget correctly, then this one's a good one, because most of the time you want to be using Nita to counter tank. So Bear Paws allows you to interrupt their attack, like Ash, like Mortis or something, allows you to confirm the kill easier. Of course, in Heist, you want to be going Hyper Bear. Everywhere else, you want to be going this star power. In terms of gears, you want to be going this setup every single time. Except for Heist, you want to be using Pet Power. But of course, that's going to be really good to get extra damage. Next, we have Otis. Use this gadget every time. Star power, ink refills every single time. And then again, it depends with Otis. You either play Otis on an open map, so you want to be going for this build. And then a lot of times I actually play Otis on grassy maps, because of course that's where tanks are most prevalent. So you want to be going for something like this. The vision gear is really underrated with Otis. And of course, you know, map like center stage, you're able just to keep on top of the opponent so easily with the vision gear. Next, we have Pam, so Scrap Sucker. 100% of the time. Mama's Squeeze, you want to be using like 90% of the time. There's a lot more open maps in the map pool right now, so you're getting a little bit more value out of Mama's Hug, but it's not worthwhile purchasing. So if you've got it, use it on open maps, but Mama's Squeeze is just going to be better overall. And then I never swap away from this setup right here, even though the health gear is really good and the vision gear is good on grassy maps. I just think the mythic gear is the reason why you use Pam in this meta, and then an extra Scrap Sucker is just so good in those 1v1 scenarios. Next up, we have Pearl. So Overcooked, 100% of the time. Heat Shield, like 95% of the time. There are also big brain plays you can make with heat retention. Say if you're playing Brawl Ball, or if the opponents draft like 2 tanks against you with Pearl, then you want to be using this star power. Basically, you're just more able to use your super more frequently and not lose your heat. In terms of gears then, I pretty much never swap away from like damage and health. That's just solid with Pearl, but again, because of Pearl's just main attack spread out, vision gear is actually pretty underrated with her, so I probably will swap with something like this. And then a Hypercharge, don't bother getting it. It's one of the worst in the game for sure. It doesn't help out Pearl too much in my opinion. Next we have Penny. Salt your barrel every single time. In terms of star powers then, I use Master Blaster because Penny is just trash in this meta. It's because of all the aggro brawlers. At least Master Blaster, like I know you kind of put your turret in a bad position, but it deals a little bit of extra damage and pushes them back. That's actually essential, you know, for defense in Brawl Ball or just getting a pesky Mortis out of your face. So I use Master Blaster. And then of course with the gears, I pretty much never swap away from this. Maybe on a grassy map I might go for something like that, but most of the time I just damage and shield. You don't really get much value out of gears with Penny. Next up we have Piper. So Piper's super versatile because you can swap between both of these. Homemade recipe on knockout bounty. Everywhere else you want to be using auto aimer, and specifically if you're playing ladder, you want to make sure you use this gadget. It's so good at countering those aggressive brawlers, and especially if you pair it with snappy sniping, you actually get more of your ammo back, so it's a really good pairing. Of course on grassy maps you might want to use ambush, but still I don't like using ambush because it forces you to stay in a bush, while snappy sniping, it rewards good accuracy. I like to think with Piper I have some decent aim. And then in terms of gears then, so of course bounty and knockout, you probably want to opt for something like this, but still if I'm feeling riskier, I sometimes go with something like this because getting an extra gadget to confirm a kill is very threatening. Of course the damage gear with Piper is very good as well. Next we have Poco. So tuning fork, I would say pretty much all of the time. There isn't too much like slowing in this meta, I don't think, so I don't see too many people using protective tunes, but it's also good to have, you know, if you're playing hot zone and there's like a Lou and a Jessie, Crow, etc., then it can be good as like a counter pick option, but I wouldn't actually purchase it. Tuning fork's just solid overall. And in terms of star powers, then it depends what Poco player you are. If you want to be an aggro Poco player and run into their faces, Screeching Solo's good. It is a decent star power, but the capo is primarily you want to use Poco as a support brawler, right? So the capo can be good if you're just behind your opponents all of the time. Again, depends what Poco player you are. I like using this setup here. Of course, the extra gadget, you're able to get maybe an extra slow removal, extra healing. The extra gadget's going to be good. And of course damage, Poco doesn't deal a lot of damage, so damage gear is going to help him out in that department. Next up we have our team. Pretty plain and simple, right? hacks every single time because in the line is just terrible. And then in terms of star powers, then we're going to be going recording most of the time, but then there might be some really open maps where you never use your super, so you may as well just use quick maths. But still, I just use recording all of the time because maybe you want to use the extra 20% shield just to protect you in a tough situation. And then for the gears, then because the damage gear doesn't really work how it's supposed to be with RT, I don't know, it doesn't give you the extra value with some other brawlers. So I go with health gear because, of course, it's kind of tanky. And then the shield gear for survival. That's normally where you use RT, right? And bounty and knockout. So that's going to be the best setup for RT. So next up, we have Rico. In terms of gadgets, both of them are pretty good if you're playing a more survivability game mode. Or like Belle's Rock, for example, on Knockout. You want to be going Bouncy Castle. If it's a lot of walls, you're going to get value out of this. But Multiple Launcher is the better gadget right now in the meta. He can just delete people with this gadget. In terms of star powers, then, I've kind of seen the light with Robo Retreat. It's somewhat underrated just because you're just so hard to kill when you're weak. But most of the time, you use Rico on a map with a lot of walls. So you're going to get the most value out of Super Bouncy. But I've kind of seen the light. Don't tell anyone I said this, alright? Just keep it between me and you. Maybe eventually I might like that more than the other star power. But in terms of gears, Rico is actually one of the few brawlers in the game that is just so versatile with every single gear. So it's pretty hard. If you want a setup which you probably won't switch away from is damage and the reload gear. You might want to opt for vision gear because typically use Rico on maps with a lot of grass as well. But for the most part, I think this is pretty safe. But again, he's super flexible. So that's why I like using Rico a lot of the time. Next up, we have Rosa. So again, it depends on what kind of situation you're in. I think for the most part, Unfriendly Bushes is the better gadget, but right now in this meta, Rosa's not the most, like, the strongest, so Grow Light's going to allow her to be a bit more sneaky, especially some cheesy strategies in Hot Zone. That's where you see Rosa most of the time. And then in terms of star powers, again, both of them are pretty good. I think because Rosa right now doesn't cycle a super as frequently, I think Plant Life is the better star power. But I won't put you away from going Thorny Gloves as well, especially if you combine it with the Hypercharge. You can just rip through people so quickly. And in terms of gears, I never switch away from the speed and damage because you're never going Rosa on an open map or away from grass, right? So the speed gear pairs really well with her. In terms of Ruffs, then, so both gadgets are pretty good. Sandbags are good against snipers and good for survivability if you're playing it on knockout or bounty. Air support's going to be really good for lane controls. For example, if you're on Hard Rock Mine, you just pop this gadget and the opponents have to run all the way back to spawn. So it's a good gadget for that reason alone. And again, it depends what game mode you're playing. A lot of people are using field promotion on like knockout and bounty. You pair it with like a Gene, Buster, and it's really hard to deal with. But for the most part, air superiority is going to be good. Because the way you use Ruffs is you use your super to break open key walls around the map. So that star power is going to be good for that reason. And again, Ruffs is good because he's quite flexible with his gears. So a bit more of an open map with less grass, you go with this build. But then if you're playing like, I don't know, Hard Rock Mine, you probably want to opt for speed and the vision as well. Next, we have Sam. So of course, you want to be going this gadget 100% of the time. High recovery, 100% of the time, and then gears, I never swap away from this setup right here. It's just really good for Sam, just giving him that additional shield at the start, because with Sam, you're not going to try and be surviving all the time, right? You just want to go all guns blazing and sprint into their faces, so the extra shield's going to help when you're constantly respawning. Next, we have Sandy. So Sweet Dreams, 100% of the time. Rude Sands, like 99% of the time. Maybe there's some good pairings you can get on a nice open map with this star power, but again, I don't really like it. The reason why I use Sandy is to stop the opponents from regenning and from scouting grassy maps. And then gears, I never swap away from this one. The Mythic gear is absolutely terrible. Shelly is next. So in terms of gadgets, clay pigeons 100% of the time. I use Shell Shock. I mean, Band-Aid is okay, but Shell Shock just allows you to confirm kills a lot quicker. You know, Shelly's not the best in the meta, so at least if you can combine this and the clay pigeons, you can get some good value. And then in terms of gears, I pretty much never swap away from this. The extra clay pigeons is so good. And then again, you use Shelly mainly on grassy maps, so that's why I use the speed gear. And then in terms of the hypercharge, I think it's okay because she gets the additional speed, but I don't think it's worthwhile purchasing with coins. Next, we have Spikes. So life plan everywhere except for heist, where you use popping pin cushion. And then in terms of star power, you'll be using curveball literally everywhere except for Big Friend. Big Friend fertilized spike is actually really underrated, but again, that's just you hardly get Big Friend in ranked, so just bear that in mind. Next up, gears, I pretty much never swap away from this. He needs the extra shield because he's squishy, and the Mythic gear is just so broken. Even though it's got nerfed, it's still one of the best gears in the game. But, you know, if you're playing Spike on a grassy map, you might want to opt for something like this instead. And then the Hypercharge is good because you get the additional speed and damage, but it's only 20% larger super, so I wouldn't really say like it makes or breaks Spike, but it's good to have because he's a super versatile brawler. Next, we have Sprout, so Transplant 100% of the time, Overgrowth 100% of the time, and then in terms of gears, I use this setup all of the time as well. You might want to opt for maybe the extra gadget gear, maybe with Sprout as well. But for the most part, you might want to use, I don't know, you can switch. I like using Shield because he's squishy, but maybe because he lacks DPS, you might want to go damage. But then the Hypercharge itself, I think, I don't know. Like, the Hypercharge itself isn't that great, but the additional speed and damage is the reason why it's good. And it's actually made Sprout a lot better in ranked specifically. So if you play a lot of ranked and you want a really dangerous last pick, then Sprout, get the Hypercharge. It can be good for that reason. Lastly, we have Squeak. So in terms of gadgets, residue 100% of the time. In terms of star powers, it's kind of up to you on this one. I would say it's a 50-50. But super sticky can be good to confirm kills with your super. But I use chain reaction pretty much all of the time. Maybe because I'm lazy, or maybe because I never play Squeak in this meta. And many times the gears, I'll never swap away from this. You definitely need the gadget charge gear. That's the one you must get on Squeak. And then just damage. He lacks damage, so it just makes sense with Squeak. Okay, so jumping into the final 5 then. First, we have Stu. So Stu, again, he's super versatile. That's why I love him. In terms of his gadgets, you want to be going speed zone on like gem grab, hot zone, or just any map where you're going to be a bit more defensive and you want to use the extra speed to help your mid win their engagement. Breakthrough is going to be really good in Brawlable and just more aggressive maps with a lot more walls. You're able to make more plays. In terms of star powers, you want to be going gas the heal pretty much 90% of the time. Sometimes there's a good matchup for Zero Drag. It's pretty hard to pull off though, unless you're really good Stu. I won't really recommend getting it, even though it's fun. It's super fun, but Gaz the Heal is going to be the better one most of the time. And then in terms of gears, then you pretty much never go wrong with this setup right here. Maybe if you want to be extra cheesy on a hot zone map, you might want to swap for something like this instead. But for the most part, I think you're just pretty solid, just going damage and shield. That's just the way that Stu works. Next up, we have Surge. So in terms of gears, then I think Power Surge is the better gadget at the moment, because the main problem with Surge is if you're stuck at the lower level, you're just useless for your team, and good players can just abuse a Surge at level 1. So make sure you use Power Surge in those more competitive games, because then it gives you more space, more time to try and get that first level. But again, if you're playing against brain dead noobs, then Power Shield's going to be pretty good. So yeah, I like to run that on ladder. It's a lot more fun. Of course, Serve Ice Cold's going to be the better overall. And again, just depending on what map you play. Grassy map, you want to go for this. Of course, non-grassy, you want to go for this setup instead. Tara is next, so Sport from Beyond 100% of the time. I like Healing Shade all of the time. Maybe if you're playing like a sniper or someone that has a really slow reload speed, Black Portal, but I've always preferred Healing Shade literally for years now, because you can get so much value with it sometimes. Like, probably the most valuable star power in some points in play. But in terms of gears, pretty much I use this all of the time with Tara. Maybe I want to opt for this on a grassier map, but you can never go wrong with spamming 4 of those gadgets. It can be really annoying to deal with. Next, we have Tick. So last hurrah, probably 95% of the time. I've seen some cheesy strategies with my Mania, but I think against good players, it's actually just not that great. In terms of star powers, then, I've been using automatic reload a little bit more, but I just think this star power just suits Tick so well. Just being able to heal up constantly and get to that shield gear. And of course, you want to be using this setup 100% of the time. Don't listen to anyone else. No gears matter with Tick except for these 2. You're just wasting your coins. And then lastly, we have Willow. So in terms of gadgets, then, it depends on what Willow player you are. I prefer Dive just because it's a lot easier to hit. You might think this one's easy to hit, but against good players, they can juke Willow pretty easily. So you want to use Dive because you've got to waste a lot of opponent's utility. You know, if there's a buzz jumping on you, you can quickly spam out some shots, pop into the wherever you go, and then it gives you a bit more time to at least your teammates can back you up, etc, etc. In terms of star powers, then, both of them are just meh. I wouldn't even bother buying any of these, but if I was to play one, I use a Love is Blind all the time, but I don't really notice anything with it. And I don't use Obsession because it's only 25% speed boost, and it's actually really hard to hit Willow's supers. But, you know, if you're confident in hitting your supers, maybe you want to use Obsession, but I use Love is Blind, and then I never switch away from this setup right here. So that's going to be it for today's video, guys. I hope you enjoyed this one. Of course, there's timestamps in the description, so you can go through every single one. But that's going to be it. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.